everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Shushoku Café video series. My name is Kasia. I'm the founder of Ikigai Connections, which runs the job board nihongojobs.com. And here is my sidekick, Dozo.
Hi, everybody. This is Takeshi of Quick USA. We are a recruiting company, and I'm very happy to talk about this theme today.
So today we have a very special guest who's going to help us understand the world of professional interpreting. Now, when we talk about interpreting, we know there's also translation, which is the written version of communication. But we're speaking just about the spoken version today. And in another video, we also talked about more informal interpreting, something that you can do without necessarily being a professional certified interpreter. But today, we're going to talk about what it's like to be a professional interpreter. So this should give you great ideas if you're interested in doing something like this in your future. So let's introduce our guest.
Hi, I'm David Higbee. I'm a Japanese, English, and Spanish interpreter, and I do a lot of different things, but probably the main one is I'm a certified court interpreter, and I have 2 credentials in both Japanese and Spanish, and so I get a lot of jobs interpreting in the courts in California, also in different states as well. And then I get requested to go and interpret at what are called depositions. Out of everything that I could say about my 22 years doing this, I guess probably the most interesting thing is that I went to Japan as a Spanish teacher, and we had 2 kids over there. My wife was pregnant at the time, and so I had 2 kids that were born in Japan. And my wife said, I want a Spanish-Japanese interpreter. Find me one. I went and talked to the hospital, and the hospital said, we only know one person that speaks Spanish and Japanese, and that's you. So we're unfortunately going to have to hire you as her interpreter. Ask your wife if that's okay. She said, well, I guess I have no choice. So that's what I did. So I started doing interpreting in Japanese and Spanish. I had been a court interpreter between Spanish and English previously. I had been certified in the United States, but I stopped doing that for a couple of years so I could go to Japan and teach Spanish and have that experience. And then I'm a linguist, and so if I live in a country, I want to learn the language of that country. And so I was studying Japanese, and they said, hey, we don't have anyone else who can do anything even close to Spanish to Japanese interpreting in a medical setting. So come and work here and help us and help these patients. And so I did. Long story short, I got hired to interpret for Japanese consultants in Mexico who needed someone who was trilingual, both Japanese, Spanish, and English. I did that for about 7 years. They were teaching the Toyota production system, or the Kaizen methodology, and I did that for 7 years. And then I came back to the United States because the drug cartels basically shut down business in Monterey, which was my main professional base. So the job that I had done for 7 years in Mexico was shut down, and I basically lost that job. And so I went back to court interpreting, and it was great for a while, but I decided I wanted to do more Japanese work, and where I was at, there wasn't any Japanese work. So I applied to be an in-house interpreter at Honda Research and Development in Torrance, and they hired me to be an in-house Japanese interpreter for 2.5 years. For that reason, I moved to Torrance, California, and that's where I lived until literally 2 months ago when I moved away from Southern California and I moved to Oregon, and now I'm a freelancer full-time. So really my one full-time freelance professional position was the 2.5 years that I was working at Honda Research and Development as one of their in-house interpreters. So I know that's a really long story, but yeah, that's my story. That's how I became an interpreter in 3 languages, and that got me to where I am today. So the most important skill to be an interpreter is having a native-like understanding and native-like spoken command of the language all of the languages that you're working in. I was lucky because I started as a Spanish-English interpreter. And honestly, growing up, I didn't speak any other languages besides English. I grew up in a monolingual family. My family growing up was not bilingual. My family now is bilingual. I married, my wife, who's from Argentina, and that was actually my first university experience, was going to study literature and journalism at the University of Buenos Aires. So that's the first thing that someone who wants to do professional interpreting needs to keep in mind, is that you understand the other language at a university level. That is an absolute prerequisite and requirement to be a professional interpreter, because it's not like everyday conversation. I mean, it's not like Japanese 101 or even 201 level. We are talking about, literally rocket science. I mean, literally, we're going in and talking about, a recent project that I have is, EV vehicles, right? Next generation EV vehicles being developed between Japanese, companies, joint ventures, and they're talking about electronic vehicle technologies, battery technologies, hydrogen cell technologies at a level that's as close as possible to a native speaker, which some people will say, you can't really reach that level if you didn't grow up speaking the language as a child. And that's not true. And I'm proof that that's not true. I didn't start learning Japanese. I mean, sure, I started learning Spanish and other languages. I loved languages in high school. I studied languages. I was fascinated by languages all of my life, but I didn't really master a language until I was probably 19 or 20, and that was Spanish. And then later, I decided, okay, I really love Japanese and Japanese culture, and there's a reason why I like Japanese cars and Japanese, denki seihin and everything. And I realized that a lot of it had to do with Japanese culture, Japanese business culture, Japanese philosophy. There's this fusion of samurai philosophy with Shinto philosophy, with Buddhist philosophy, and just this unique worldview that I think gives Japanese people an advantage in creating quality services and products, or improving, that's the key point, improving on things that other people may have created. You have to have language skills that are on par with a native speaker, but it's also important for you to realize that these are the fields that I am fascinated about. Because once you become an interpreter, you are going to continue to study about those fields. You're going to learn about those fields, and that learning is never going to stop your whole career. So you have to have not just language skills, but also this attitude of constant learning. I love to learn. I will watch, 6 or 7 YouTube videos about technical subjects and the latest news in Japanese. I turn on a movie occasionally because my kids are saying, Dad, you have to come watch a movie with us. They force you to do this. You have to stop working all the time. And so I will go watch movies with them. But for me, I just love learning. And so those are your 2 prerequisites. Learn another language at a really high level, and then love learning about some of the things that are happening in our world that are, innovative, that are novel, and that are progress in a way, but maybe have their imperfections that need to be perfected.
So how did you study Spanish? How did you study Japanese to be in that level? Did you go to different school, or you just went there, living there, and then running in there? How did you run for the languages?
That's a really great question. I personally think some formal study is very helpful. If it's your first time learning another language, having formal study at the university level can be very beneficial. However, American universities are not well known for being excellent places to learn another language. And there's a reason for that. And that's because a lot of what drives university funding is research. And in order to be able to read and, assimilate and then copy and, summarize research in another language or from another country, right? People need to be able to read those languages, at least an intermediate, if not a lower advanced level, right? I recommend that you study to learn, and getting a good grade and learning are 2 separate things. And let me explain what I mean there, right? If you study Japanese and you are just doing your homework, right? The homework is there to teach you very basic concepts, just so that you can keep moving forward and so that your professor can show that you have some academic progress, right? However, the human brain is capable of so much more learning than we are guided to do in a 1-year or 1 semester Japanese class. So I would have the goal, if you are serious about learning Japanese, of taking everything that you learn in your Japanese 101 or 102 or 201 and multiplying that by a factor of 2. If you have a lesson about, wa and ga, and you are given some example phrases, right? What versus watashi ga, right? Take those example phrases and think of things that you would like to say using those same structures and find the new words. Pull out a dictionary, right? It's a great resource for Japanese dictionaries, right? There are a lot of great dictionaries out there these days. I would get at least one handheld dictionary, but look up the words that you want to be able to say to express, and then experiment putting those in phrases, so that your Japanese professor can correct you. Right? I mean, if they give you a piece of homework and you finish the page and you just take, and at the very bottom of the page, you make up one sentence of your own, that initiative will show your Japanese professor that you are serious about learning Japanese. There's so many things you can do. And that's without even talking about Netflix or YouTube that's in Japanese or podcasts in Japanese. I mean, there's so much out there for anyone who is serious about learning Japanese, more tools than we have ever had. If you learn it with all of the tools that we have, I'm not sure you're really interested.
Yeah, I really think that people who are, especially in college, or they're thinking of their, what they want to be when they grow up, they think about this interpreting thing, and it's just so overwhelming for them. But hearing your story, I think it's very inspiring to know that, it's the opportunity to learn the language, but also really want to learn it. And as long as you have that kind of neshin or jonetsu or passion or desire to study, really anything is possible. So even as something as complicating sounding as interpreting is going to be very possible for anybody who has the drive. So thank you so much, David, for sharing your feedback, your very passionate way of speaking. And I really think that this will be very inspiring. So the things that you mentioned, we can drop them in the description so that people who are interested in learning a little bit more can start their journey to become the future David of the interpreting world. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you everybody for watching. If you have any questions, definitely leave comments or let us know when we post this on social media. I think that we can get a discussion going on this really important topic. So thank you for watching our Shushoku Café video, and see you again soon.
See you
Bye.
for watching.